From honoring the long history of the GT franchise to actually copying camera angles from the series, this is how the Gran Turismo movie relates to the game. I mean, the series has been around for a very long time, so there's plenty to go through. Well, as much as you could have for a racing game series anyway. Starting with the original Gran Turismo on the PlayStation way back in 1997, the franchise has always had a very different vibe from other racing games out there. Expensive supercars, iconic tracks, and some sweet classical music have been a staple of Gran Turismo for over 2 decades now. Oh, and you bet that they're absolutely adored by the fans. Well, maybe apart from Gran Turismo Sport. I mean, you don't sell 80 million units for no reason. That said, most of these games are very similar in terms of their core ideas, because in each one of them, you're a new driver who's moving up the ranks of the motorsport world. You know, getting new cars, entering different competitions, and yes, acquiring better licenses. And well, that's sort of what the main idea for the Gran Turismo movie is as well, as it got a new driver with no experience and throws him into the unrelenting world of motorsports. In fact, since the games barely have a story attached to them, the adaptation takes a very smart approach. After all, it's a story about a Gran Turismo player becoming a real-life driver. Yep, that's the premise of the movie. And get this, it's all based on a true story. Inspired by Jan Mardenborough's life, the movie tells the story of how he was a teenage Gran Turismo player and became a professional race car driver after winning a bunch of driving game tournaments. Also, even though there's a lot of on-track action that honors the franchise with its vibe, there's a rich narrative going off the track as well, with David Harbour's character serving as Mardenborough's trainer. Wait a sec though. How does anyone even decide to make a Gran Turismo movie in the first place? I mean, it's not like the franchise has a rich lore that allows any good story. Well, turns out the movie's director Neil Blomkamp absolutely adores the car brand Nissan and all the lineage that comes with its racing moniker, Nismo. So, as soon as he heard there was this idea floating about, he was fully on board. Oh, and let's not forget that Jan Mardenborough also started his career with Nissan, which would have probably motivated Blomkamp to take the reins of the project. With that said, even though the film takes elements from the game and inspiration regarding real-life aspects of the game's community, there was no pressure from Sony to relate it to the games. Like, honestly, that's sort of unheard of, since the company has been so heavily involved with its other video game adaptations. But again, I guess it makes sense since there isn't much to follow here anyway. So, according to Blomkamp, he had all the creative freedom in the world to just go out there and do his thing. Now, I know that might be disappointing to many fans, since Gran Turismo is such an important franchise for racing games. There's nothing to worry about though, because despite Sony not forcing the filmmakers to stick close to the source material, they've tried to do that anyway. Yep, in an interview with PlayStation Blog, Blomkamp revealed that even though there was no such thing as an established plotline from the games, they've still put in a lot of work to make sure the film has that Gran Turismo DNA. What does that mean, you ask? Well, for starters, they've used a lot of imagery from the games and tried to include it on their real-life tracks. For instance, you might see some checkpoint boards or track markers that are taken straight out of the games. In fact, Blomkamp said that we might even see some of the signature victory poses and awards in the film too. I mean, that's all you could ask for in a Gran Turismo film, right? Just to get that feel of the video game series. Oh, and speaking of feel, a ton of work has gone into making the cars look fast as well. Now, conveying speed on a screen is always tricky, and sometimes even games like Gran Turismo can struggle to do that. However, over time, we've seen the use of techniques like motion blur and using a higher field of view to really make sure the player knows just how fast they're going. Yeah. And well, that's sort of what the idea is for the movie as well. In fact, other than just copying the video games for their techniques, Blomkamp said that they've looked at other racing movies as well, like Steve McQueen's Le Mans. For him, the sheer tension that the movie manages to build between two drivers racing each other is still unmatched to this day. And yeah, he's not wrong, because those rapid camera cuts between two cars are used in cinemas to this day. Besides, the Gran Turismo games largely focus on a single car that you're controlling, so it's not like they could have made a full movie out of that. But expect to see a lot of motion blur, some wide camera shots, and of course, intense on-track battles. In fact, there are so many visual elements taken from the game that the movie sometimes blurs the line between what's real and what isn't. Yep, despite having access to supercars and iconic tracks, the filmmakers still opted to use CGI very liberally. Why? Well, again, they wanted it to feel authentic and evoke the feeling of nostalgia among Gran Turismo fans. And so, a lot of the racing shots are just pure CGI. As a matter of fact, if you pause the movie's first trailer and look at some of the footage closely, you'd probably think it was a screenshot from Gran Turismo 7 rather than the movie. And while that may seem bizarre to some people, we've got to remember, when you don't have much material in the way of a narrative or a story, that's literally all you can do to make sure you're at least somewhat recognizable as an adaptation. Well, apart from including some iconic cars, of course. Okay, so Gran Turismo, as a franchise, has always been about the cars. Oh, and by that I mean that the car aspect of the series is even more important than the racing. After all, you don't have all these extra features like photographing cars in front of famous places, or even very authentic car dealerships. And well, thankfully, we saw a lot of these iconic cars in the movie's trailer as well. Of course, the main attraction here is Nissan's lineup, since the Real GT Academy was sponsored by the company. So you've got a ton of R35 GTRs, a 370Z Nismo, even a Ligier Nissan LMP racer. Oh, and in a way that sort of represents the way you progress in the games too, with the 370Z being a starting point and the LMP racer being the top level. Although there are a bunch of GT3 cars in the trailer as well, including a Porsche GT3 Racer Cup, a McLaren 720S GT3, a Lexus, a Camaro, and of course the antagonist's chrome gold-wrapped Lamborghini Huracan. But that's not all, because the trailer also shows the iconic Ford GT, a Ferrari 458 GT3, and an Audi R8 GT3, all of which have made some significant appearances in the Gran Turismo franchise over the years. That being said, I still would have liked to see some more recognizable cars from the games, like the double-striped Dodge Viper GTS-R, or the insane Suzuki Escudo Pikes Peak version. Oh, and yet there's no mention of the new Nissan Z either, which is weird because that would have been the perfect car for this movie. Having said that, there is one aspect of the film that's directly taken from the games, and that's all the camera angles. I mean, we've already talked about the visual makeup of the movie with all the motion blur and all that. What really makes Gran Turismo so recognizable, however, is its arsenal of camera angles that the players can use in-game. Now, these obviously range from gameplay perspectives all the way to replay angles. And yeah, it wouldn't have taken a genius to figure out that a lot of the replay camera angles are going to be used, like the tire chase cam or the hood view. What's actually impressive about the production of this movie, though, is the fact that they've also managed to incorporate gameplay camera perspectives. No, seriously, the filmmakers have used FPV drones to carry IMAX sensor-approved cameras to really chase the cars around the track. Now, these are obviously going to be used for both far chase angles, or even some of the more dynamic replay shots that rotate around the car. Not to mention, they also built a custom camera rig just so it could follow the car from behind and fit the environment within the shot as well. And yeah, that's your classic chase cam. But here's the kicker. The Gran Turismo movie will even have the driver's POV with the cockpit view. Oh, and to capture that, the stunt driver literally had to lie down just so they could mount a camera where his head would have been. I mean, that's just incredible. And so, there you have it. From actually copying camera angles from the series to honoring the long history of the GT franchise. That was how the Gran Turismo movie relates to the game.